Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
So, Phil, before we get started, I think we should declare this an election-free zone, don't you?
Yes, yeah, because we are recording on the day of the election. Yeah. So we
just don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. We're not taking guidance for any of the polls. We are an election-free zone, and yes, we'll stay out of politics on today's podcast because I think there's probably enough of that later on. In the evening that will take place. So we'll declare this as an election-free zone for this week's podcast. So we'll give you a bit of fresh air this morning away from all the post-election politics.
Exactly. And in today's pod, we've got an exclusive interview with Motors about its acquisition of the Cazoo brand. So we caught up during the week with Phill Jones and Lucy Tugby, and we'll share an extract from that interview on today's pod as part of that process. And we have a full supply special interview, which is available now in your podcast feed. So if you want to hear the full details about what that means to motors, what it means to dealers, what it means to used car buyers, then do check out that full episode.
Absolutely. And we have got an exclusive coming up that will be in your podcast feed next week. So stay tuned and keep an eye on that coming through your whichever podcast feed you use. But this is a great interview, pre-recorded interview with Victor Sang, who is the UK country manager at Omoda and Jayco. Now, very open, very frank, clear conversation with Victor around some of their plans, the launch plans for the UK and what they're expecting as a franchise operation going forward. And we spoke to him whilst he was back in China, in Wuhu. So a great interview there. So do not miss that in your podcast feed next week.
Yeah, you know what, Phil? We haven't done many sort of international interviews. So knowing that Victor was in China whilst we were doing the interview, anything could have gone wrong, couldn't it, with the comms?
It was actually better some of the ones that we do down the road, to be fair. I mean, it was very clear. And
it was nice and clear. It's as though we were sitting in the next room. But it really is a great interview. And it's so revealing. I actually learned a lot about Omoda and Jayco and indeed Chery. And their ambitions for the UK are very, very clear, very precise, and the way they want to grow the network. So do look out for that because it's a very revealing interview.
Yeah, definitely. And do stay tuned for the midway break, where Stephen Whitton will be sharing his latest view on Menable moments. So not one to be missed at the midway break.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
Headlines this week come from AM Car Dealer and Motor Finance, starting with new car registrations hit 1 million in June as fleet continues to drive sales. Advertised used car prices dip in June as buyers focus on older, affordable models. Stellantis boss warns that it might be impossible to order some new ICE engine cars later this year. And we have two acquisitions this week as Group 1 expands its Mercedes-Benz representation and Stoneacre acquires a neighbouring group.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. If you're a supplier and would like us to profile your business and reach our audience of dealer bosses, managers and decision makers on one of our dedicated supplier specials episodes, get in touch with Curtis and Philip at motortraderadio@yahoo.com.
So, as Curtis mentioned earlier, one of the big stories from last week was Motors' acquisition of the Cazoo brand. So we did catch up with both COO Phill Jones and Marketing Director Lucy Tugby for this exclusive podcast chat about the deal and what it means for the dealers and car buyers. Phill, let's start off with yourself and basically the thinking behind Motors buying the Cazoo brand, and what does the purchase actually include?
Yeah, so I guess a key thing in the question there is we've purchased the Cazoo brand, right? So, dispel any rumors that we're planning to sell cars direct or going to open up physical dealerships or the such like. We've bought the brand. Cazoo is among one of the top 5 automotive brands in the UK and absolutely a household name amongst car buyers. There'll be generations of sports fans who grow up knowing the Cazoo name. And, that was kind of the key attraction for us. It wasn't straightforward. We know there's a lot of emotion around the name with dealers, but fundamentally we believe that this provides a path to really helping car buyers find the next car from a known and trusted brand. And, it's perfect for us to add it to our network, alongside Motors, eBay and Gumtree. A multi-site proposition, as we call it, is fundamental to what we do. So we think that the Cazoo brand is a great fit into our network.
And Lucy, why have you taken the decision not to rebrand Motors as Cazoo?
Yeah, well, we know from our research that car buyers on average visit 4.2 websites during their car search journey, and that's increasing and up 20% in just 2 years. So we know that actually buyers want to visit multiple websites, increases the trust they have for the dealers that they see on those sites, and also the likelihood to make contact with a dealer. So having both brands provides a really important opportunity and unique opportunity to significantly expand our visibility with dealer listings and obviously strengthen our SEO footprint, etc. So it is really, really important to have those two brands. We want to continue to invest in Motors as a web destination, as well as, obviously, as Phil's already pointed out, Cazoo has very high consumer awareness. So with further marketing investment, we'll continue to sort of drive that through and make Cazoo a famous, innovative, mobile-first automotive brand.
I mean, Curtis, as clearly there, I think it was key in all the messaging with all this stuff that has gone around the Cazoo brand over recent years as to what the strategy was to take the brand, why it, from a Motors perspective, it felt the correct fit into the growth of Motors, and where Cazoo plays a part in that consumer platform for Motors. So as sort of Phill pointed out right at the start, didn't he, that they bought the brand, and it was clear that was the clear message, and they wanted to get out right from the offset with this.
Yeah, you're right. That's absolutely clear from the outset, isn't it? It is the brand that Motors have acquired. And I did actually work with the guys on the B2B comms for the release on the acquisition. And a lot of thought has gone into this, a lot of preparation. They've got a very, very clear focus on how they're going to be using that Cazoo brand now and in the future. And I guess the sort of the next stage is the app that they talk about on the extended interview, which is a mobile first app, which is available soon. So that's going to be the next part of this sort of evolving story.
Yeah, so as we said right at the offset there, the full interview, a lot more details within that interview with Lucy and Phill as to what the plans are with the brand and Motors and the onboarding of the Cazoo brand into the operation is available on your podcast feed. So don't miss that in your podcast feed. So we'll head over to the headlines now, and as Curtis said right off the offset there, we're heading over to AM Online, who've covered the new car registrations that have come out on Thursday of this week. That the UK new car market has hit the 1 million sales part in the first half of the year, just about. I think that one was Curtis, and surprisingly made it. And it's half for the first time since 2019. So it is reporting that June saw a modest growth year on year of 1.1% in new car registrations, and that's just taking the month up to 179,263 units. But there is some caveats behind this, isn't there? Because it's not, yes, there's growth, but there's still some challenges in both the private and the EV market.
Yeah, very much so. So looking at the year-to-date figure, so that's, as I said, we've just reached the 1 million milestone. So year-to-date, that means the market is up 6%. So heading in the right direction, although there's all sorts of headwinds heading our way towards the end of the year, which we'll touch on in another story. But June's market growth was very much driven once again by the fleet sector, which was up 14% in terms of volumes there. And so if we look at fleets, so it was up 14%, which pretty much accounts for just under 60% market share for the month. So 59% for fleet, 38% for private. And looking at the year-to-date figures, fleet is tracking at 60%. Private is at 38%. So that really shows the movement of direction, where the registrations are coming from, where the cars are going to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, your year to date for private registrations is down 12% in terms of that year on year. So down from 435,000 last year to 382,000 this year. But that kind of does, sort of highlight the direction, because for June was down 15.3% from just short of 78,000 last year to just over 67,500 this year. So, the SMMT highlighting that, that trajectory of private consumer registrations is still fairly subdued, fairly challenging for the market. And definitely the registrations are being very much pushed through the fleet and business sector. When you start to look at the fuel types, diesel for the month of June was down 17.2% overall, dropping from a 7.3% market share to a 6% market share. And that takes them to a year-to-date of 6.6% market share, down from 7.9% market share last year. Petrol, not as bad year to date, but felt it in the month of June. So June petrol market share fell from 55.8% down to 50.9%. So petrol now starting to feel the pain from this transition to electrification, but marginally moves them in terms of that year to date from 56.8% in 2023 year to date down to 55% year to date. But bit of changes in that BEV, plug-in and HEV market as well, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, but BEV is the one that we always focus in on, and for June, the market was actually up 7.4%. So a healthy uptick there for BEVs. So in the year to date, it is tracking at 9.2%. So I think that's actually the biggest monthly share for BEVs since December last year. But that year to date figure remains pretty static at 9.2% markets. 9.2% share, giving it 16.6% for the year to date.
Yeah, and we did say an election-free zone today, but there is a call out from the SMMT that's saying that the industry is calling for the next government to back consumers as fewer than 1 in 5 new battery electric cars go into the private market there. So signalling the challenges that remain in that marketplace. And just before we move on to the performance for the LCV, the van market, as always, cover a little bit of what's happening across the European partners there. That France is down 4.8%, down to 181,700. Germany, however, is up 6.1%, achieving 297,300 registrations. Italy, double-digit growth for Italy, up 15%, up to 160,000 registrations, and a marginal growth for Spain there at 103,400, an increase of 2.2% year on year for Spain.
Yeah, and van registrations for June. A bit of a shock here, in fact, because van registrations were down 4.5% in June, and that actually follows 17 months of consecutive growth. Now, there is a reason for this because June last year was a particularly high market. So I don't think we can draw too many conclusions from that drop. This isn't comparing like for like because, as I say, June last year was particularly strong. So the sector overall records the best first 6 months of a year since 2021, with the market up 4.5% on last year. So a dip for June, but overall the picture is looking pretty positive for vans.
Yeah, it's a little bit more optimistic than what we've seen in the car market. So, in terms of moving on to over to car dealer and what's happening in the retail space, and this is from Malta's Market View report, and this is that Malta's reports dip in used car retail prices as dealers stock fewer vehicles in the month of June. And this is the data shows that the dip in used car prices in June down to 17,168, and that dealers stocked on average 51 units in 6 months of the first half of this year. So this is some insight that you had sight of with the Motors Market View into that goes into a lot more detail in terms of what's happening with that retail activity.
Yeah, very much so. So you're right. Prices dipped, albeit slightly. Yeah, we're talking about a 1.3% month-on-month dip. So the June average was £17,168. So it's a shortfall of just over £220. So if we look at the overall price drops, it was 1.8%. over the course of the first half, because now we can actually look at those first 6 months of the year. So overall prices dropped 1.8% from an average of just shy of £17,500 in January. So not massive drops. Yeah, we're starting to see those month on month drops becoming more and more steady, more and more marginal, really reflecting what we're seeing in the wholesale sector in our conversations every month with Darren Martin at Cap HPI. So, in terms of prices, that's how the picture's looking. The biggest drops we're seeing curiously at both ends of the age spectrum, with vehicles aged over 10 years falling 2.3% from £7,060 to £6,895. So that was a year-on-year drop of 3.1%. Whilst cars aged under 2 years dropped 1.4% from £31,134 to £30,690.
Yeah, and as I said before about the average stock levels, saying that the data found that the stock levels dropped from an average of 54 units in May of this year down to 51 units in June, and also down from last June when the average units carried by dealers was as much as 55 units there. So saying that franchise dealers experienced the biggest drop, down 11% month on month, down to 56 units, while independents remained steady at 39 units on average, just down one on May. But I say there's a lot more detail in this, and there is comment in the report from Lucy Tugby, who, as I said earlier, is the marketing director of Motors, saying that with only small downward movements of prices and stock levels in June, we are seeing further signs of a relative stability that has characterized the first half of this year, and that the focus for buyers in June was on essential purchase cars with older, cheaper combustion engine models, attracting plenty of online attention. and that we expect this to continue into July as families and personal budgets start turning to summer holiday spending. So some insight there from Lucy as to what she's seen in the data for the month of June.
And next up is the latest Menable moment from our good friend and mental wealth guru, Stephen Whitton, who's feeling a little discombobulated.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are, and on your podcast feed. Next up is our latest Menable moment, looking at mental wealth and well-being awareness and best practice in the automotive sector. With me, Stephen Whitton. Yeah, hi everyone. It's Menable Moments time again. Hope you're well. By the time you get this, the outcome of the election will be known. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, was the whole uncertainty and insecurity that comes with anything that involves fairly major change. Kind of predicting the outcome of the election there, aren't I? But whatever it's going to be, there is going to be some change. And the whole process of leading up to that can really be described as discombobulating. What a great word that is, discombobulated. And it's a word that I've used recently with somebody who reached out to me who's going through a fairly major life change in terms of relationship, and their life is not heading in a direction that they probably would have anticipated it would be by now. And all of that combined is really causing a load of uncertainty, insecurity, and they generally are just discombobulated. And I say just discombobulated, it's actually a very debilitating feeling. So I wonder how often you feel like that. How often do you feel that change and uncertainty and whatever might be coming at you is enough to sort of stop you feeling in control of your senses a little bit? Maybe a bit overwhelmed, maybe a little bit sort of confused, uncertain, and just generally uneasy. Now, the world is a challenging place right now. We know that. There's lots going on. I'm the worst for doom scrolling through all sorts of social media, and when I'm alone on my own, I tend to watch YouTube videos that are a bit doom-laden about various things that are going on in the world and stuff like that. But I do that from a perspective of optimism, of being prepared, and also being ready in the event that some of those things that can make you be a bit anxious or feel a bit overwhelmed, if they are to come true, then our best line of defence is to be prepared. And it's the same in regard to anything that makes you feel a little bit uneasy, a little bit sort of on edge, insecure, uncertain, and that is to mentally, at the very least, or emotionally, prepare yourself. So I hope you've heard the word discombobulated before. It's a great word, and it does really describe how we perhaps feel sometimes when things are a little uncertain and a little unsure. And what I wanted to ask you to do is to just be mindful that across business, we can also have a tendency to inadvertently create that discombobulating feeling when we perpetuate any uncertainty that's coming. And, no one likes the idea that things are going to change massively. Change, however, in business, as we know, is essential. So it's important that we embrace it and we're prepared. And how can you get prepared? Well, get creating some mental wealth. Create some opportunities for people to talk, to be open about it, to share their concerns, and just know that they've got people around them who will listen and who will understand. Now, as you go through this, or as you've been listening to this, you no doubt will be reacting in your own individual personal way to what discombobulated or change or uncertainty means for you. And that's the other thing, is that we all adapt or approach that differently. Some people will take it in their stride. Others will be completely incapacitated by the overwhelm that's caused by so much change and uncertainty coming at them. So be mindful of that across your business. Be mindful of that with the people around you. And notice those subtle little changes as well, because we all face change from time to time and stuff that can make us insecure and uncertain. And just notice that and just do what you're always doing, which is be there, be a shoulder to shoulder, and have that great ethos of you're just there to listen. And as I said on a talk recently, you're not there to fix, you're not there to repair, you're actually there just to listen and understand. So, I hope you're not too discombobulated with everything, and I hope that, as I say, by the time we're listening to this, the outcome of the election is known, and we can all just get on with it again and reduce all of those stress levels that come from uncertainty and change. If you want to chat through any of that, if you've got anyone in your business that needs help or support, you know how to get hold of me, stephen.whitton@menable.org. Okay, I will see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Well, a couple of thoughts there, Phill. He mentioned the E word at least twice.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the D word several times.
I know. Yeah, rather him than me.
Yeah, and he was spot on every time. Discombobulate. There were no stumbles, there were no falls. So well done, Stephen, for that.
Congratulations on that. So as always, if you do need to get hold of Stephen, he will be on your LinkedIn feed somewhere, or you can follow him on the Menable website, which is Menable, MENABLE. I can't even spell this morning, Curtis. .org. Or you can email him at Stephen, that's with a PH, .Whitton, that's WHITTON, @menable.org. So thanks again for Stephen for sharing that knowledge, and we'll look forward to hearing from him again in a fortnight or so. So back to the headlines. Now, if you were about on Thursday morning and you weren't somewhere posting something, then you might have caught the latest interview from James Bagger from Car Dealer. And they ran a press release on it, but it was a fascinating, very open, very frank conversation by James with the Stellantis boss. And this is that it may be impossible to order petrol and diesel cars later this year, Stellantis boss says. So to avoid paying huge fines, Stellantis may have to throttle back petrol and diesel car supplies. You like that one, Curtis?
Yeah, throttle back.
Throttle
I like
back.
it.
The exclusive interview, which is shareable on their website with the boss, Maria Garcia Davino, says that it could be an immediate consequence of the ZEV mandate, and buyers may not have choice later than this year than to order an EV from her brand. So very clear, very concise. And I watched the interview with Maria by James, and clearly there were some points raised in that interview that she was very adamant they will not be paying fines. They have no intention of paying. It is not in their strategy to pay any fines, and therefore means that they will be achieving their ZEV mandate level. Now, the big question is, how will they achieve that ZEV mandate level? Was the question that James posed back to Maria.
Well, I mean, I thought this was a fascinating interview, very revealing. And if you have got 20 or 30 minutes to spare, it's worth checking it out and watching it because, as you say, Maria Grazia Davino, the UK boss of Stellantis, she doesn't duck any of the questions, and she does make it quite clear that Stellantis as a brand will not be paying any fines. And this is something that Carlos Tavares, the international boss of Stellantis, said just a couple of months ago that as a brand, they will not pay fines. So the only way around this, other than selling a lot more EVs, is to sell fewer ICE models, so the percentages start to work out. And this kind of ties in with our opening story about the new car market, because as we said in that, year to date, BEV sales account for 16.6% of the new car market. So a long way still adrift of that 22% targets that everyone is focused on at the moment. So what we will see towards the end of the year is some of the brands reviewing how they're selling their petrol and diesel models, and maybe just pulling them off the market, making them unavailable for sale. And when you factor in that Stellantis operates Vauxhall, Peugeot, Citroën, DS, Fiat, Alfa, Abarth and Jeep, that's a lot of brands, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think, for context with this, that 16% circa that year to date against the 22%, obviously there'll be some manufacturers in there that will be dominating EV registrations as a percentage of their volume, such as Tesla and others, some that won't be doing as well. So when you start to break this down in terms of, the Stellantis brands, I think James pulled it out on the interview. Citroën have got one EV within their lineup of vehicles. So, there are challenges that sit behind this when you start actually breaking this down by each individual manufacturer, and particularly in Stellantis' position. There are very many brands within their UK brand representation under that Stellantis umbrella. So, and this doesn't apply to Stellantis. This applies to Peugeot, Citroën, and all their individual brands as an individual manufacturer, not as an overall. So it's how they will start to shift focus from maybe one brand to another brand to achieve the relevant registration requirements that they need to do as a business. So it's quite an interesting one, this one. And we were talking last week, weren't we, about the latest conversations around Ellesmere Port and Luton threats coming out of Stellantis. Yeah. And James was sort of pulling that into this conversation as well. And I'm not sure there was a clear and concise answer, but I think Maria was very clear. They have their plans, they have their strategies, and they will achieve what they need to achieve, however they do that. So it was a very open and, as you say, very frank and honest conversation there with Maria.
Yeah, and interestingly, because Maria is asked what she thinks of the ZEV mandate, and she makes it quite clear that in principle she's not against the ZEV mandate. It's just the way that it's been imposed and the inflexibility of it, and I guess the lack of any input from the automotive sector, because government at the time wasn't listening, when it was introduced. So, as I say, do watch the interview because it is fascinating. I think we're going to see a lot more OEMs saying very, very similar things over the coming months on this. And, in terms of buying new ICE vehicles towards that last quarter, it could be problematical for some brands and some models.
Yes, one that we'll be watching very closely in the second half of the year. So we're talking about dealers. There's been 2 acquisitions announced this week. So just to close off today's podcast, the first one is on AM Online. And this is that an AM100 Mercedes dealer group has been acquired by Group 1 Automotive. So clearly showing that the North American US brands are still on the acquisition trail, and obviously the realignment of brands is continuing. And this is that Group 1 Automotive now has more than 20 Mercedes dealerships here in the UK, following, as described, as yet another acquisition from the expanding US-owned dealer group. And this week it announced that they were acquiring the L&L Automotive operation, which is 4 Mercedes businesses operating across north of London at Stevenage, Hertford, Hemel Hempstead and Bishop's Stortford. So again, good growth there and a clear plan and strategy that this alignment of the OEMs with these groups that are acquiring US operations is clearly growing.
Yeah, it's a great acquisition for Group 1. They're being very strategic here. So it's the Hertfordshire market area. So it's the complete market area that L&L Automotive have sold to Group 1. And it does follow on Group 1 acquiring Intricate Retail, which added 12 Mercedes-Benz sites across the East Midlands and Northwest England. And, this is in recent months, so it really has significantly grown its Mercedes-Benz representation to what will be 20 sites now. And it's interesting when you look at what this adds to the party, because the 4 extra sites are expected to sell more than 2,800 new and used vehicles annually. And the acquisition, the story says, is expected to generate £83 million in annual revenues. And of course, those new car sales are based on net revenue under Mercedes' agency model. So, it's a really interesting move here. And, Group 1 will be very, very pleased with this acquisition.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure it won't be the last either. So definitely one to keep an eye on as this sort of realignment and partnerships of brands starts to continue. So, and the final story today, heading over to Motor Finance Online, and this is the Stoneacre Motor Group buys Trenton Motor Group for an undisclosed figure, and that the sale is believed to include the addition of Nissan, Dodge, Ram, KGM and Citroen after sales to the Stoneacre Grimsby operations. So good little business they've bought here. And I do know the group at Trenton. And it's a great little family business that's been run over there in Yorkshire and led by John Luce, who is was the MD there up until recently following the acquisition. But this is again, as Stoneacre continue their growth, they reported to have a 70 million turnover at the Trenton. So, again, nice little business there for Stoneacre to sort of onboard into the rest of their franchise operations.
Yeah, and Philip, you'll know this part of the world much, much better than me. But
kind of, you talk a little bit different than me.
Yeah. Drawing on my sort of schoolboy knowledge of geography. So Stoneacre based in Doncaster, Trenton based in Hull. And Trenton represented Nissan and Peugeot in Hull and Nissan in Grimsby. And I think I'm right in saying that this acquisition will mean that Stoneacre will represent Nissan, not for the first time. I'm pretty sure they've represented Nissan in the past. So this is all about re-engaging with the Nissan brand. So it's a good acquisition, isn't it, for Stoneacre?
It is, yeah. And again, I mean, Stoneacre are growing. I'm not sure how many sites they've got now. I think it's in excess of 60. I think from memory, I think it's around the 64. I don't know where this takes them to 64 or more. But again, Richard Teetham and Sean Fairweather, who head up that business, clearly have continued to grow. And it's a bit like other operations that we talk about every so often that kind of just happening behind the scenes. They're just taking these one sites or these 2 or 3 sites, and suddenly you look, Stoneacre's gone from 30, 35 sites. Suddenly they're in excess of 60 sites in a very, what could be called a very short period of time. So, they just keep taking these little operations and growing quite clearly. And Sean Fairweather, who's the managing director of Stoneacre Motor Group, said that this acquisition not only strengthens their position in the market, but also reflects their commitment to supporting local economies and communities, and that they're pleased to welcome the employees of Trenton Motor Group and look forward to working together to achieve a mutual success. So like I say, I know John, good operator who's been the managing director there at Trenton Motor Group. A slight change for John in terms of his next career move, because the business was owned by people that own East Riding Sacks Limited. He's moved across within the parent owners of what was Trenton Motor Group to remain with that business, and he's transitioned to the new parent company as commercial director, as I say, of East Riding Sacks Limited, and there's just like change there for John. And I'm presuming it's sacks that you get like your potatoes and things like that, is because they don't all come frozen in bags from the supermarket, Curtis. Is
that so?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
when you were talking about sax, then I thought you were talking about saxophones. Who knows? Maybe John can tell us.
I think they are. They are. I mean, they are the UK's largest manufacturer of paper sacks based on a Sutton industrial estate. So, yeah, I mean, best of luck to everybody from Trenton Motor Group. Best of luck, John, and your senior exec team that have moved on into other areas of the parent company. And best of luck to Stoneacre in the onboarding of Trenton Motor Group. A nice little business there in Yorkshire that they've managed to acquire. So I think we've done that without much discussion and conversation around the E word this week, although Mr. Whitton did ruin that for us, didn't he?
Well, he did, yes. Yeah. Best laid plans and all that.
But as always, we'll try and cover the headlines. Hopefully, as we said right at the start, please do check out the full interview with Phill and Lucy from Motors. It'll give you a lot more insight in terms of the rationale and strategy behind the acquisition of the Cazoo brand, and more importantly, what they are intending to do next. And they do intimate that in the full interview. So do check that out in your podcast feed. And before Curtis says it, don't miss next week's interview. That is one not to be missed in your podcast feed with Victor Zhang, who is going to be talking around the growth and plans for Omoda and Jaku in the UK sector going forward. So fascinating interview there.
But that's all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. As Phill says, we're back during the week with that exclusive interview with Omoda and Jaku boss Victor Zhang. So until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.